NFL free agency is just around the corner. I'm Jennifer Piacenti with Sports Illustrated, and to break down all those important tight ends that could be making some moves, I've brought in Sports Illustrated's senior fantasy analyst, Michael Fabiano. Babs, a little bit of a surprise. We've had 3 major tight ends already tagged by teams: Mike Gesicki, Dalton Schultz, and David Njoku, but there's still quite a few tight ends on the move. So I want to talk about who you feel are the top 5 that are going to be moving teams potentially. Let's kick it off with the guy that just lost his bestie, Gronk.
Right, Rob Gronkowski. I don't even know if he's going to come back, right? But right now he's a free agent, and at least he's mulling the decision on whether to retire or return for another NFL season. And if he does, boy, the Bengals would be a fun fit, right? CJ Uzomah is a free agent. Going back to the Buccaneers, depending on what the quarterback situation is, could be a worthwhile decision. The Cardinals, imagine Gronkowski with the Chargers and Justin Herbert. Giddy up. That would be a whole lot of fun. This guy's a future Hall of Famer, but he's still putting up really good numbers, still an impressive red zone threat. So if Gronkowski decides to come back, he'll likely be a borderline tight end 1, depending on where he lands.
Absolutely. Moving on to your number 2 tight end, Zach Ertz. Now, when we saw him get out of Philadelphia and move over to Arizona, he was pretty productive for fantasy managers, but he is back on the market again. Do you think they keep him in Arizona?
That would be a good fit, especially considering Christian Kirk's a free agent, AJ Green's a free agent. He did very well last year, as you mentioned, in the desert. He's got a good rapport with Kyler Murray. He had 763 yards on 112 targets last year between the Eagles and the Cardinals. He was a top 10 fantasy tight end. If he doesn't land in Arizona, the Chargers would be a nice fit with Justin Herbert, although what tight end wouldn't be a great fit with Justin Herbert? The Colts could have some interest. Jack Doyle is retired. The Jaguars could have some interest, and the Titans have 3 tight ends that are going to become free agents here. So Ertz could end up in Tennessee. That would be a pretty good fantasy fit as well. But for me, the Cardinals and the Chargers would be the top 2 choices.
Okay, Evan Engram. What are we going to do with this guy? He's clearly so talented, but it just never seems to have worked out. I read somewhere that maybe people will be considering him as a slot receiver. He's certainly a very talented receiver. He can exploit mismatches, but what can we expect for Evan Engram this season?
That's a great question. As a rookie, he had one of the best seasons of all time among tight ends from a fantasy perspective. One of the best. And ever since then, he's kind of been up and down, right? Injuries have been an issue. Inconsistency drops have been an issue as well. So with Engram, I feel like if he lands in the right spot, and it's a lot of the same teams that could use a tight end, right? So like, the Chargers, for example, the Colts, for example, maybe sticking with the Giants, although they seem to try and be turning things around in terms of some of their personnel. The Jaguars could be a good landing spot for Evan Engram as well. Anywhere where we know that he'll be one of the 3 or 4 top options in the passing game, Engram could retain some value as a tight end too, and maybe move up a little bit.
Okay, next tight end on your list. Where do you even start? His current team is obviously kind of now in a teardown. If he stays, his quarterback could be maybe Drew Lock. But what are you thinking about for Gerald Everett? Where would be a good landing spot?
Perfect example, right? Gerald Everett's a guy who last year actually had some fantasy value down the stretch for the Seahawks, right? He was putting up some decent numbers. He had career best across the board, but they weren't great numbers, right? He wasn't a top 15 tight end. And now that Noah Fant's in Seattle, I would think Everett's probably going to be gone. So the Cardinals, the Chargers, the Jets could be a good landing spot for Gerald Everett. Maybe the Titans could be a good spot as well. But Everett's a guy that a lot of people have talked about in the past as having a lot of upside. When he was with the Rams, he showed some flashes, could never really break away because of Tyler Higbee's presence there. Everett's not going to be anything more than a tight end 2, though, no matter where he lands.
I tend to agree with you. And finally, a tight end that wasn't really on anybody's radar before the season started, but it ended up going to the Super Bowl with the Cincinnati Bengals, CJ Uzomah.
Right, Uzomah, he's actually drawn a lot of comparisons in his career to Rob Gronkowski, mostly because of his build. He's just a big guy. But Uzomah's not someone who I feel like will ever be more than a tight end 2. He's popped at times during the course of his career. Last year, he had a couple of really good games, but overall, he was 19th in fantasy points among tight ends. So if he stays in Cincinnati, he probably won't get drafted. If he goes to a team like the Giants, if they move on from Evan Engram, maybe he can move up a little bit. Maybe the Jets, a team like that, or the Chargers. But overall, Uzomah would have to land with an elite type quarterback to really have any increased value in fantasy drafts for me.
Well, he's certainly with an elite type quarterback now, so let's see what happens. Guys, for anything you need to know about free agency, especially tight ends, you can always check us out at si.com/fantasy.